Hi, my name is Daniela Venezia of DV Textiles, and I'm here today to show how to dress this tapestry loom by Olik Craft. And as you can see, this is a tabletop loom. It's around 14 inches wide by around 16 inches tall. And in order to know how to set it up properly, there's a video available on their website. And just one thing I wanted to mention before we start warping it is just make sure that in your setup there's beveled edges on one side and a cut edge on the other side. It's better to have the beveled edges in front. That way there'll be less friction on your yarns. But if you happen to have flipped it around, that's okay too. And the other thing is these heddle bars up here, this is what's going to hold the yarn under tension so you can weave it. And so as you can see, these have wing nuts, and so they can pivot. And what you just want to make sure is that your heddle bars are in the directions so that there's an obvious hook on top and a hook on bottom. Okay, it depends how it's pivoted, but basically you should be able to feel that hook on the outside, and we're going to use that hook to put our yarns in this vertical direction. And I'm going to be using these terms, so I might as well introduce them. The yarn that goes straight on the loom is called the warp yarn, and the yarn that goes across the yarns that are dressed on the loom are called the weft yarns, the fill yarns or the weft yarns. And what's great about a loom like this is you can dress it using ordinary twine thread that you can find at a hardware store. And then you can use any type of yarn ends that you can find either in your house or if you go to like a Goodwill store or something, because it's a very forgiving loom and it's really meant for hand manipulation. So you can even use, here I have just some felted pieces that you can tuft in. This type of loom is used for artworks, to create fiber artwork, so tapestry type creations that can have a lot of dimension that you can hang on your walls. Or you can make pieces also. You can make, you're limited by the length, but you can make cushion covers, or you can make placemats, for example. But in this lesson, we're just going to cover how to dress the loom with the warp thread so that you can begin weaving. Another thing that I wanted to point out, on this loom, if you look at these slots where the thread will go, they're about 1/4 inch apart, which is a very nicely spaced element for doing tapestry looms, for tapestries. So for that you're going to use very thick yarn, but there's also the possibility to double up the thread in these slots, in which case we will be using this heddle bar to keep the threads separated and to give us a little opening to put our shuttles in. But for today, on this lesson, we're just going to be using the more open method, so just one thread per slot. Now, what's really nice about this Olik Craft loom is that it comes with a stand, and the stand is adjustable. So here I have it in a lower position, but we can also loosen up these wing bolts on this side and slide the stand even higher. So it depends on how you like to work. I like to work standing up because I have this nice countertop, but you might like to work at sitting at a table, or you might even like to work with it flat on your lap if you're watching TV or something, and that's possible by removing the stand. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to start warping this loom, and the easiest way to do this is to not have the stand, because it's hard to like hook up underneath here with the stand. So what we're going to do is we're going to just remove these wing bolts down here, so that we can lay the loom flat. Like this. We're going to start warping our first project, and since it is a first project, we're not going to do the complete width. So what I've done is I've counted out the notches from left to right until I've identified the center notch. And as you can see, I put a little X there. And then I counted out 7 notches to the right, and I put a notch there. And then 7 notches to the left, and I put a notch there. I mean, this is about, I'm going to have a weaving of about 6 inches wide, but you can do it any width that you'd like. But it's good to count the notches, not the wooden part, but the actual notch, and then do the same thing for the other side so that you know that your warp threads will line up if you're not starting from the outer ends. Now I'm going to take the yarn and I'm going to, in my case, put the bobbin on the floor so that it can roll freely. And I'm going to start by putting my yarn in the notch that I've marked out. And then I'm going to just wrap it around the hook. The hooks to the left a few times so that we can anchor that yarn into place. And then once I've done maybe 3 to the left, I'm just going to go around a couple of times with the end just to make sure it's anchored. I prefer this to making knots in case you ever have to adjust the tension. And if you're starting at the most left side notch, you do the same process but moving from right to left. So now we're going to go up to the next marked notch. That way we know we're completely straight, and start pulling and hooking the yarn and keeping it under tension as much as possible. Now I've come to the end. I've gone 1 past the notch I counted out, which is fine, as long as they're straight. And now I'm going to do the same thing, keeping this yarn under tension. You can test the tension like this. I am going to wrap around a few notches to the right. And then just wrap it around that 1 notch a few times. So there you go. Your first warp is set up. Test the tension. It's good to have enough tension so that they don't sag, but not too much tension so that the fill yarns don't fit in. And if you happen to have a yarn that's loose, like here for example, you can start pulling it, that slack tension to the outside, and then retying it off. Now you'll want to have these heddle yarns fixed into place. So that that tension remains. Now we're going to do the first couple of rows, and since we want these rows to anchor the rest, we're going to do a technique called twining. And basically you take a piece of yarn around 4 times the width of your project, and you just wrap it around the first warp thread to the left like this, and then you take the one underneath and you pass it behind the next warp thread. And then again, take the one underneath and pass it behind the next warp thread. And you just do this until you've gone completely across. And this type of technique will give you a more firm anchor than just plain weave will do. Okay, so when you reach the end, just make sure that all the spaces are even between the yarns. And now we'll go back the other direction. So twist it once, go under the last warp thread, take the next yarn, go over under the next warp thread. So it's a little bit opposite of what we were doing. We're now taking but you see it looks fine. Now it's still the under thread. The under thread goes behind the next warp thread. Now in tapestry weaving, the warp threads are just to anchor the fill threads, and the fill threads actually fill up so that you really aren't seeing the warp threads as much. Okay, at the end here, we'll just do one twist like that, and there you have a very good anchor for the beginning of your tapestry. Now that we have the anchor in place, and one thing to be careful of here, I pulled too tight when I started, so I'm just going to pull this out a bit. Okay, we're going to start to weave plain weave, and for that we're going to use the heddle bar. I'm calling this a heddle bar, but it could be called a lease stick, or there's other various terms from it. But basically what it's going to do, it's going to lift every other warp yarn as we're weaving, which will give us the plain weave, because a plain weave is over, under, over, under. So to put that in, just put this in the diagonal and then turn it around like this and rest it on the warp. And since here we haven't doubled the yarns, this is mainly for doubling the yarns, but I think we can use it also for a more open one yarn like this. And so what we want is the first yarn to the left is in the deep slot, then we take the yarn next to it and put it in the higher slot. We leave the next yarn in the lower slot and we put the next yarn high. So it's going to be low, high, low, high, low, high, low, high, low, high, low, high. So as you can see, I'll show you with this piece of black cardboard, is when you twist the stick one way, here we see it's all the even threads that are lifted. And if you twist the stick the other way, you can see that it's all the odd yarns that are lifted. So we're going to be using this to weave our plain weave. But you have to be careful to always look and make sure that the yarns are in place. Now I'm still doing this on the flat lay for ease of filming, but if you want to do this with the loom in the upright position, you can use the rubber bands to hold this stick in place. Now we're going to start our weaving, and we'll use this nice thick white yarn. And so we're going to put the yarn on the shuttle. And to do that, just hold the yarn with your thumb here and then go a couple of times around the middle. And then, because this is a rather thick yarn, we're going to do around the sides rather than to keep building up the middle. So do a couple of times around the middle and then just do an 8-figure around the side. Okay, so we're going to start with this. And we can just, with our heddle in this position, do our first passage. And you can use a comb to beat the yarn into place. And now we're going to twist the other direction. Put this into place. Now you want to make sure when you throw it across that you leave this bubble so that when you push the yarns down, they don't start to bring in the sides. Here I had a little extra on this selvage here. That's what the end is called. So I just pulled it a little bit, but you don't want to pull it too much. Now you twist it again. Take the yarn. Bring it over. Make sure there's a bubble. Bat it down. Don't be afraid to bat it down a lot, because like I said, the point is to hide as much as possible the warp threads. Twist your heddle. Let it bubble. Bat it down. And there you are. You're weaving.